Hello everyone and welcome to this first video in our series exploring Catholic spirituality. As this is the first video, I wanted to address a very fundamental question. That is, why would you want to spend extended periods of time looking at how to develop your prayer life? Perhaps the biggest disconnect between people with regards to prayer is their experience of it. Many people's experience of prayer is that it feels like talking into a void with no seeming response. It may be a cultural norms done as a habit that would feel odd not to do, but the perceived benefits also feel a little bit unclear. And lastly, it could be that while you feel your prayers are being answered and addressed, it is usually in some abstract manner that can only really be observed through a great deal of discernment and focus. It doesn't make you a bad person or even a bad Christian to be in this place. Just like in conversation with other people, we are only ever experiencing one half of the relationship directly. God is still perfectly able to hear and act irrespective of where we find ourselves when it comes to prayer. All this said, this is not what we would consider a great relationship between people. The same is true when we are discussing our relationship with God. This begs the question then, what is time of prayer meant to be like? Now, this is not a clear-cut answer, as like with all relationships, our one with God is dynamic. It will fluctuate over time due to all manner of outside influences. But there are some distinctive features that will tend to stay true as long as we are in good spiritual health. Firstly, prayer is meant to be refreshing and rejuvenating. Just as we have a physical dimension to us that is rejuvenated through becoming one with food, our spiritual dimension rejuvenates when it is intentionally on our side brought into communion with God, the source of life. And this is part of what is being addressed in Isaiah 46:4, when it talks about how God sustains and rescues us from death. The second aspect of prayer is that it makes us tangibly aware of the presence of God within us, around us, and in all things connecting and sustaining them. When first experienced, this is what people most clearly focus on as a religious experience, as it makes the other party of the conversation tangible. When we learn to pray consistently in a manner that brings us into this experience, it makes prayer a skill that is far more traceable, like that of a muscle's growth. I think my favourite expression of this experience comes from Psalm 139, where the writer puts into chant their experience of feeling the presence of God. The third feature of prayer is heavily linked to this, in that it brings a sense of peace. In coming to the intentional stillness necessary to perceive the presence of God, then also experiencing that presence, we really perceive a sense of coming home and being cared for. Now, this aspect of prayer, this peace, is a wonderful experience and can help carry us through even the most traumatic and challenging of times. Lastly, when we perceive the presence of God and interact with it, we are usually overwhelmed by the vast infiniteness of God and the sense of small and brokenness we are by comparison. We call this sensation awe and wonder, and it is a gift of the Holy Spirit that we receive from God in our baptism. This sensation is intermingled with a deep love that God has for us. It is a profound experience that is really difficult to put into words, but is the basis from which we are then able to unpack the following gifts of the Spirit. These gifts of the Spirit are very much a topic for another time, but it's important to recognise that our experience of these gifts first begins with this experience of awe and wonder. As mentioned before, all of these sensations will fluctuate over time, and it is not a bad thing to feel distant from God at times throughout your life. A perfect example of this is Saint Teresa of Calcutta, an incredibly holy woman who did so many wonderful things in the slums of India, who regularly described times where she felt she could not feel the presence of God around her and within her. It's also fine to have short prayers where we just thank God or place something into His care. This is how it's perfectly fine to text people instead of just talking to them all the time. The point of this video is not to disparage anyone's prayer life, particularly if it is leading you to a healthy relationship with God. Here we purely aim to raise awareness that there is much more to prayer than what many people experience, and that actually it is an incredible source for personal development through communion with God. Now, this is a huge topic, and to explore its various aspects, I am aiming to create a whole playlist exploring the various components of prayer and how Benedictine Catholic spirituality can really help us to understand and unpack these areas of our life.